is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. Today, he said we're going to talk about the catacombs, and I said, well, how French, Stu? Stu Horvath. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, you know, hanging in there. It's December. It's rainy.
Yeah, you know, it's not snowing now, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's going to be 60 today. This is weird.
Yeah, I'm going to open the door and just enjoy that fresh air while I can. Dude, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the Campaign Sourcebook and Catacomb guide, which is a 1990 expansion rule book thing for second edition Dungeons and Dragons. But before we get to that, I just want to do a quick shout out to Josh at the Princeton Record Exchange for helping me out getting those Echo and the Bunny Men records. That was awesome, and I super appreciate it.
Very cool. See that, man? Homies helping homies. It's great.
Yeah. He had no idea that was coming, and I just wanted to like spice up his day.
Oh, how wonderful. I love it. So this is like one of those, we made a book for everything in second edition books, right?
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, there's so many flavors of we made too many books in second edition. The main one that I think that kind of like has become emblematic of second edition's bloat is the player's reference books, the complete guide to thieves, the complete fighters, complete wizards, complete bards, complete barbarians, complete elves, complete halflings, complete gnomes. You know what I mean? There's like a million of them that the brown covers, and like they all kind of suck. And you can kind of feel like they're uselessness when you flip through them.
Didn't they make a ninjas one too?
There is a complete ninjas that I believe is the last one.
Thank God.
Yeah, because it's not even a class. Like at that point, you're just like, what? Come on. Yeah, there's a complete gladiators too for Dark Sun and Shair for Al-Qadim.
Did they not have pirates?
No, there's of ships in the sea, but it was one of the DM references.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like they really do cover everything. Sometimes it's bad. Like I think that the Complete Thief is worthy. We'll probably do an episode of it one day. Like everything else, like fighters, Complete Fighters already starts introducing more combat mechanics, and it's just like, I don't need those. Like D&D is already combat heavy. Even back in the 90s, we were just like, oh God, more combat? Like, no, we don't need these rules. And all of the kits in that book are kind of dependent upon you using those new rules. And a lot of it is like that. It's just like needless expansion. It makes money. I understand the publishing ethos behind it, but those are like amongst my least favorite shelf space taker uppers.
Oh man, I mean, I remember when we first got into second edition, one group I was playing with, it's like a DM's nightmare because you know, now we have D&D Beyond, which is awesome. Yet at the same time, as a dungeon master, I've got players coming to the table. It's like, I want to be like this special character that does this, 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 and this. And here's a link to find the rule. So I mean, at least you have that. And that's too much as is, right? But when someone would roll up to the table, you know, during our second edition run back in the day and be like, hey, yeah, so I'm going to play this specific kind of this, that, and the other thing, and I can do all this stuff. I have a book for it. And then you're like, oh God. And then like mid-combat, you're like, hold on, I have to check something. And it's not like checking through the player's handbook, which is already dense. It's now you're in another reference book trying to find the one thing that you think you can do that ultimately you can't do.
Yeah.
You read it wrong.
That's the thing, is that most of the kits now, so kit, we're not even talking about the right thing, but kits are sort of like character class expansions, maybe sort of the equivalent of a prestige class in third edition. It makes your standard generic fighter or a thief into something slightly different. So like the thief kits are actually all interesting. So you have bounty hunter and assassin and burglar, and it sort of tries to using the proficiencies to make you more of a specialized character, but it's an illusion. It doesn't actually work because the skill system sucks and it's all fluff, really, is what it comes down to. But it convinced a lot of people that there were playable rules, and it really made a mess of the game. Third edition does the same thing with prestige classes and all their specialized rules, but it kind of does it better because they're all mechanically sound, but you still have that huge bloat where you're going through a million books. I remember hauling like, 2 feet of books to every friggin' game, and it was awful.
Yeah, and I thought I had a bad back.
Yeah.
But these are something different, though. These are Dungeon Master Guide reference, which actually, to me, makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I think that these sort of get painted with the same brush as the player's expansion, the character class books, because they're the same format. They're soft cover. They have sort of like that same faux leatherette kind of thing. The player books are brown with gold. These are blue with silver, but they look a lot alike. They're kind of floppy and they're not very sexy.
No.
Not at all. But I do think that this one in particular, I like the whole line. I think almost all of them are interesting, but this one is like from where we're sitting in 2021, coming back to this book, which was always sort of the one where I was like, the first half of it, I don't care. But like Catacombs, I love Catacombs. I love
Who
dungeons.
doesn't?
And it's all these sample dungeons. And that's really great. It's sort of like you take the Dungeoneer's survival guide and you strip it down and you give me some pretty isometric maps. And like you make like a cool thing about dungeons, and it makes my brain want to make dungeons. And it's a really great, the back third of the book. And that was what was really sexy for me back in the 90s. It just made me want to make dungeons and be a good DM. But coming back to it now, when I know so much more, the first half of this book, first 2/3, fantastic. It's scary. So like there's not a lot of like time devoted to theory about how we play Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing games, because we play them, and like there's sort of like an uncritical, like we just get around the table and we do it, and figuring out how that works isn't really necessary for the hobby, because we all kind of do it ourselves. Like with video games, there's a lot more theory, because it's sort of, you need rarefied tools like programming and art and all that stuff that kind of combines. But like role-playing games are DIY. It's really like playing pretend, and we can make it up on the fly. Theory is cool. We just don't need theory. But this book is about theory. So first of all, it's written by Jennell Jaquays.
Home run.
Yeah. Like, so I had no idea who she was back in the day. Now it's like, holy crap. Her section was meant for the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it was cut for size. So all of this material was supposed to be in the DMG. And it's a fascinatingly sharp breakdown of how we play. So she sort of breaks down like types of games, types of players, stuff like that, how they interact. This is the first time I've ever seen the term rules lawyer.
What?
Yeah. I remember reading this back in the day and being like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. I know a rules lawyer, but like I didn't understand the fact that like this is like an identification, like how that person plays. I kind of took it as like, oh yeah, that guy, Bill, he's a pain in the ass. Every time we try and do something, he's like, oh, well, we got to pull out the rule books. But it's not just identifying the rules lawyer as a problem player. It's identifying the rules lawyer as a style of play, and tries to give you solutions to satisfy what that person is coming to the table looking for their game experience to be like, without it like impacting your other types of players.
Right.
It's really genius. And I think that this book has become like second nature in a lot of what we do as people who run games in the modern era. I think that it is just trickled into every kind of book. I think a lot of people read this and internalized it, and it shows up in their approaches to creating and running their games, and it just trickles down to everybody in the hobby at large. It's an amazing thing to read in the year of our Lord 2021.
It's interesting because when you say it like that, I remember being 27, 29 maybe, and I went and I started taking bass lessons. And a buddy of mine in the bar was like, Hamlin, why are you going and taking bass lessons? You're really good. And I said, I know what I need to do to make it sound good. I know what I like to do. I don't know why I do it. I don't know why it works. I just know it does work. And I kind of want to learn how it works, because I think if I know how it works, it's going to actually make me a better player.
Right.
And this sounds like the same thing where like we've been playing so long, and up until recently, when you dove back into it, you dismissed it on the way up because you're like, I already know this. I'm already doing this, show me the maps.
Yeah.
But now we look at things from a different perspective, and it's almost equally as cool to know why and to know the theory why. And it's going to enhance play, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that most people who are playing these games run on instinct. Like you refine those instincts over time, but like you read a book like this and all of a sudden you start to understand why, the whys behind a lot of things. And this might not be even like super accurate, but it really is one of the first times I ever read and can think back to of where the why was really approached. And it trickles into everything. It's called the Campaign Sourcebook. It's geared towards helping you put together a game that's going to last. And like, partly that's like, have a good story, how to design your game world so that it's open and compelling and encourages exploration. Making a game that's all of those things also requires you to kind of understand the people around the table and how you kind of cater to their expectations. It's a lot easier to see when we're talking about board games, because board games like deliver really specific like brain reactions for people, right? Sometimes like you just want that collaborative game, like a co-op. Sometimes you want a really like vicious competitive game. Like those things are really visceral reactions we have to the mechanics, but they're also small doses. So like we kind of think of it differently. Whereas like when you start to extrapolate it into a large long-term thing, like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that's going to go for more than a year, you kind of lose the idea that the game needs to have like those feedback loops where like you are looking for a specific experience and the game gives that back to you. There's a lot of reasons why campaigns blow up over time, especially as adults. But like, I think that one of them back in the day when we were kids, one of the reasons our campaigns would last 3 sessions and then poof was that like we weren't thinking about what players were wanting to get out of those games and delivering it. It was all just like, we are going to play this thing without really like, why are we doing that? And this book kind of like unearths that.
It's tricky. It is tricky because when you are young and you're getting into the hobby, you're not really thinking on that really cosmic like level. You're not like thinking like top down. You're thinking ground truth of like what the situation is. It's like, holy crap, I have to figure this out and I have to entertain, because that's what it is. When you're a dungeon master, to a degree, you are trying to keep 5 people entertained. It's like babysitting for like a family of 5 and hoping for the best. And maybe they left pizza money, God willing. But it's a different kind of experience when you do it when you're older, because now when time becomes more precious, you need to get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah.
You need your group to gel and you need everyone to be on the same page. Even if they have a different style of play, finding ways to meld it together, like keeping the band together longer is a much trickier thing, because trying to get people to even show up for practice, as it were, is difficult enough as it is.
Yeah.
And so I think a book like this is really exciting because it does offer that kind of glimpse behind the curtain where if you want to go and learn about it a little more when you're older, it might actually help you become a more efficient and better dungeon master, as it were.
It's easy to say like everybody should have their moment to shine, right? At the table.
Yep.
Like that's an easy thing to even come up instinctively. There's 5 people around the table. Every night, each one of those people should have like a moment in the game where like they are the guy or gal. And like, we know that, but what that actually means doesn't necessarily mean they have to have the heroic spotlight for the moment. That could mean a whole lot of things. We also take for granted the idea of like, that comes out of video games is like, you got scrapper, tank, healer, your support role. And that was sort of codified in the 4th edition. There are people who really just like supporting other characters. That doesn't kind of make sense. You're sort of like, oh, you just want to like get the good heal? Okay, we can set that up. I don't think that the different types of, feedbacks are necessarily instinctive. The idea that everybody should have a moment to shine is, but the ways in which people want to shine is sometimes mysterious. And this book kind of does a job of trying to unearth it. A lot of it is rudimentary, but like the fact that like there's just so much stuff, because it goes to types of games too. And Monty Hall is something that TSR banged on about for years. Gygax hated the fact that like some DMs would like give their players like millions of gold pieces and every magic item under the sun, because he thought that that was silly. What he didn't really understand was that those players were having a blast doing that.
Right.
You know, like Jennell kind of goes back into that, where it's just like Monty Hall is like a thing, but like it could be a fun thing. None of these things are inherently bad. It's what you people around the table want and how to like balance those wants against the mechanical needs of just running a game week to week. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I run my game. My game is pretty much Monty Hall. I know that's what the players want.
Yeah.
And that's coming from like years of being a dungeon master and just knowing the style of play where people want to kill shit. Yeah. People want to blow stuff up and they want to get a lot of loot for it, to the point where like, I know if at the end of an episode, I don't let them roll enough on the treasure chart. They're kind of like, is that all? That's all we're getting? and you sit there and you're like, well, but you got like this massive, crazy item. And so, you got to let them roll. For me, that's how it works. I've got a couple rules, though. You're going to re-roll if you get a Ring of Wishes. You're going to re-roll if you get a Hammer of Thunderbolts. Only one Ring of Invisibility for the party. So I don't need a bunch of visible dickheads running around making the game difficult. There's a few other things. I think I have like 5 things that if you get it, you got to roll again.
Yeah.
But that's the style of play that they like. And I'm cool with that because in the end of the day, we're all having a good time because, yes, I'm trying to entertain them, but they're entertaining me with the dumb stuff that they do. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's a win-win for everybody.
In addition to just the Monty Hall stuff, like Jennell also gets at a couple other things that maybe the first times that I've heard kind of the concept. She doesn't call it railroading, but she talks about the idea of dragging your players by the nose through things where they lose agency and how that's a bad thing. And also talks about the sandbox, the idea of a sandbox. She calls it an open-ended campaign. These ideas, now we call it a sandbox, and we all kind of know what that means. And we kind of knew what it meant in 1990 because, Mask of Nyarlathotep was the first sort of sandbox campaign, and it opened a lot of designers' eyes. But I don't think that when I was playing Masks of Nyarlathotep in 1990, 1991, I don't think I conceived of it as a sandbox. It was Masks of Nyarlathotep. This book sort of takes that step of saying, like, this thing is defined by certain traits. It's open-ended. The players can go where they want. The players really move the action after the initial setup. And that is an open-ended campaign. And most people really appreciate that. And by doing so, by just laying that out, you get to the point where people, like, somebody finally says sandbox. That makes sense to everybody. And now we all know what that kind of means. And not just what it means, but the kind of play and experiences that sort of game is going to bring to you. This is really one of the first times, if not the first time, that those kinds of taxonomy for how we play are really brought into play in something. And that's mind-blowing to me. This book is a stone cold classic. Everybody who runs games, who writes games, I think should have this on their shelf. And you could probably get it for not that much money because everybody kind of thinks these books suck,
Yeah. Little asterisk there. You could have gotten it for not that much money until after this episode drops. I mean,
Yeah, no, I mean, the whole series is kind of interesting. They get more expensive as they go on. But this one, I recently replaced mine. My original one fell apart. A lot of them have bad bindings, especially the earlier run ones. I replaced mine for $10 and it was not too long ago. And that was a good condition one. You could probably find them for like kind of crummy condition for even less. I'm pretty sure that they're also available on PDF from drive-thru. So you could just get it that way. If you just want to read it once, that's probably the easiest, least expensive way to do it. If you have the chance, you should definitely put this book in your brain.
I love it. Stu, do you have any final thoughts?
I think that was my final thought. You should definitely, if you have the chance, put this book in your brain.
It felt like the final thought, but you never know. I always try to get that little extra juice out of you.
Tom Baxa has a lot of art in here, and I love Tom Baxa's art. So that's an enjoyable thing too.
Well, there you go. This is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, where as we speak, I'm writing all of the posts for 2022. And there's a whole week on the Dungeon Master's Guide rule supplements in June.
Well, you're going to have to wait a little while for that because it's going to be a December 2021 episode.
Yeah, well.
You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I'm actually posting more because I'm kind of leaving the house and it's kind of cool. You could also check out Rocket to Russia, which is my first adventure for 321 action over on Exalted Funeral. We got some copies over there for you to pick up. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/VintageRPG. We got early release episodes. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We've got the behind the scenes look at all the stuff that I'm doing for 321 action and more. Patreon.com/VintageRPG. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.